Good morning. Ooh, that works. Eddie said I could introduce myself. My name is Jim Corner. I live in Garland, Texas. Work with the World Bible School, also work in Cameroon, and it's just a pleasure to be with you this morning. I want to thank Ed and Eddie and Robbie for allowing me to be with you this morning. I noticed on your prayer list a lot of sick folk, and I want you, if you would, to take out a pencil and piece of paper, or take out your bulletin, whatever, because I'm going to give you a name I want you to pray for. If you're like me, your memory's not all that hot, and if you don't write this down, you won't pray for this person. Kelly Smith. Kelly is a member of the congregation where I worship in Garland. She had a double lung transplant 165 days ago. The initial transplant did not work. And so about 2 weeks later, they did a second. And it appears to be working, but she will be in Houston for I don't know how much longer. This is obviously a big deal, so if you would please put Kelly on your prayer list, I would appreciate it. We live in a world where many say there's no such thing as absolute truth. And that's not new. When I was a freshman in college, this took place in English class. I don't remember how it came up. But the teacher said there was no absolute truth. And one of the students said, well, 2 and 2 is always 4. It's never 5. And one of the students said, and the teacher said, well, if to you it's 5, it's 5. I was 18. I'm not going to pick a fight with a professor, but I remember thinking to myself, you're dumber than a rock. I wish I would have the thought to say, well, now, teacher, let's say you give us a test. It's a bunch of words. And we're to write down noun or verb. And on the word fast, I put noun. And you mark it off and say, whoa, 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 whoa. To me, it's a noun. Would she have bought that? Of course not. If she did, every student would make 100 on every test. This past Thursday, I wired money to our bank in Cameroon. The account number has 11 digits. Every time I go into the bank, I take the previous copy because I know it went through. And I compare because I know and you know if one number is off, just one, it will not go to my bank account. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States. It wasn't the 2nd or the 5th or the 29th. And we could go on and on and on. There's something that you and I need to truly grasp. And that is that most people are going to go to hell. That's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. Judy, if you'd show the next slide, please. You remember he said there are two roads. One is a huge road. There are a ton of people on this road. It leads to hell. Road number two is a small road. The only handful of people on this road. It leads to heaven. When he said that, he didn't have a smile on his face. He's not pleased about that. He just knows that most people are never going to give their lives to Christ. Now, I want you to think about something. The text is not hard to understand, right? You don't have to know Greek. You don't have to have a Bible degree. It's very simple. Everyone in this room has two types of faith. We have intellectual faith and how you live faith. Let me illustrate from 2 Kings chapter 6. Israel is at war with the nation of Aram. And every time the Aramean army makes a strategic move, Elisha the prophet warns the king of Israel, so he's able to escape every time. This happens a handful of times, and the king of Aram is so angry. He brings in his officers. He says, "Which one of you is the traitor?" I say, "King, it's not us. It's that guy Elisha." He tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Now, the next phrase always brings a smile to my face, because it says that he sent chariots, horses, and a strong force. Now, what was the mission of the chariots, horses, strong force? It was to capture a rinky-dink preacher. If you remember the story, they surround the city. And Elisha's servant looks out. He says, "Holy moly, we're toast." Now, you have to know Hebrew, but that's what he said, okay? And so let's reverse 24 hours, okay? And Elisha says to the servant, "I want to ask you 3 questions. Number 1, is our God powerful?" "Yes, he's so powerful." 2, has our God ever seen a problem, or will he ever see a problem that he cannot handle? "Never." Good. Question number 3. As his children, do we ever have a reason to fear? "No." That was his intellectual faith. That was his Bible class faith. But now there's a real army outside. We're no longer dealing with a hypothetical. We're dealing with a real army. Now, here's why I bring that up. To the degree that we truly grasp that most people are going to hell, and a lot of them are people we know, that will either help us in evangelism, or it will not. This morning we're going to look at laying the foundation. Our text is going to be 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 6 through 11. And Judy, if you'll put up our main points. We're going to look at the why of evangelism. We're fellow workers with God, and the Lord is the ultimate converter. So, one more slide, please. We're going to look at the text. This is Paul speaking. I planted the seed. Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will each be rewarded according to their own labor. For we are co-workers in God's service. You're God's field, God's building. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. So, why do we evangelize? That's the next slide, please. When I was putting this sermon together, I wanted to share some really tragic and horrific events that have taken place in the history of mankind. But the more I read, the more I studied, I'd look at this and say, no, not in a public setting. This is too gruesome. This is too horrific. So I've picked two. The first is the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. North versus South. But if you're a student of the Civil War, you know that along the border states, oftentimes it was brother against brother. Sometimes it was father against son. And yes, sometimes husband against wife. Approximately 775,000 Americans killed each other during that war. Number two is Hurricane Mitch. I don't expect you to remember Hurricane Mitch because it took place in 1780. Okay? It took place in the Caribbean. 22,000 were killed. And to give you some comparison, the worst hurricane in American history took place in 1900 in Galveston. 8,000 were killed. Now, that's 8,000 too many, I get that. But 8,000, 22,000. Stone buildings were destroyed by Hurricane Mitch. You understand that hurricanes are determined, or they're in categories, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A Category 5 hurricane is the worst. And to measure up to Category 5, your winds have to be only, and I use the word only very loosely, 157 miles per hour. Hurricane Mitch was over 200 miles per hour. But here's something we need to understand, brothers and sisters. You can take every evil that's ever taken place in the history of mankind, every tragedy, everything that we would consider terrible, and put them all together, and they cannot touch hell. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 28. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Hell was not invented by a preacher. It's not something to scare us into behaving. It's real. Now, 2 questions. Number 1, is God a God of love? Oh, absolutely yes. And on Judgment Day, to those who are on the narrow road, He will say, well done. But question number 2, is He a God of anger? He is. Because to those on the broad road, He will say, depart. So, why do we evangelize? We evangelize to help as many as possible escape the horror of hell and enjoy the beauty of heaven, which leads us to our next point. We are fellow workers with God. In Matthew 13, Mark 4, and Luke 8, we have certainly one of the more familiar parables of Jesus, the parable of the sower. We're not going to go into much detail. I assume you know the story. But I do want to say this. The farmer in the story was a lousy farmer. Now, I was raised around concrete. I live around concrete. I hope to die around concrete. I love concrete, okay? But you don't have to be a farmer to understand. The farmer in the story, you don't just throw seed left and right. What's Jesus trying to tell us? Simply this: we don't know who will be good soil and who will not. And I'm going to give you 2 examples. The first, and this is an artist's rendition of Saul of Tarsus. Okay? He's one bad guy. When he stands before Agrippa, in Acts chapter 26, he said, I was convinced to do all I could against Jesus of Nazareth. In Galatians chapter 1, he says, my goal was to destroy the church of God. You remember that he has a meeting with Jesus on the road to Damascus. But before that, we're going to pretend for just a minute that instead of this being Mineral Springs, it's Tarsus, okay? And I'm going to pick on Matt because I know his name. Tough luck, all right? And so I go up to Matt and I say, hey, why don't you go talk to Saul about Jesus? I don't know for sure what he'd say. It'd probably go something like this: are you nuts? My dad's dead because of that man. I have friends who are in prison. Others have been beaten senseless by that man. He would never become a Christian. And Matt and the rest of us would all be wrong, wouldn't we? The second is a guy named Clyde Thompson. In 1928, at the age of 18, Clyde murdered 2 people. Oh, by the way, he was raised in the Church of Christ. Been baptized as a teenager, obviously didn't take. He was a Texan. In fact, there's a book and a movie about his life. It's called The Meanest Man in Texas. He's arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced to execution. While in prison, he murdered a guard and nearly murdered a second guard. And they knew, we got to get this guy out of the general population, and they put him in a little building on the prison grounds. There were no windows. Up above there was an opening with some bars where light could come in during the day. After some period of time, he's going crazy, and he wants something to read just to occupy his mind. And he thought, if I ask for a book or a magazine, they won't give it to me, but if I ask for a Bible, they might. And he did, and they did. And he began reading that Bible. And while in prison, he truly repented. Now, while that's taking place on the inside, on the outside, there was this Church of Christ nearby. There was this ladies' group. And some of them would make gifts, small gifts, and give to some of the prisoners, and some of them would correspond. And a girl named Julia started corresponding with Clyde, and they fell in love. Through the providence of God. Not only was he not executed, he was freed. When he came out, he and Julia were married. You think Mom and Dad were happy? They didn't go to the wedding. Now, they warmed up to Clyde later on. And the rest of Clyde's life, he spent in prison work in Texas. And only God knows how many hundreds, if not thousands, of people are going to go to heaven because of Clyde Thompson. In 1977, I met him. He's a little guy. Not only was he not the meanest man in Texas, he was the gentlest man I've ever met. Ever. But if you went back to 1928, 29, 30, 31 and said, hey, he's good soil, we'd go, no, he isn't. And we'd be wrong. Now, going back to the text in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, it's very, very clear. God expects us to be active in evangelism. Verse 9's always fascinated me. Because depending on your translation, it says we're either co-workers or co-laborers with God. Think. You have a farmer. He has a 6-year-old son. He says, hey, kid, today you're going to go in the field with me and we're going to work. And he gives the boy some Mickey Mouse job that a 6-year-old can do, all right? At the end of the day, he says, come here, son. He puts his arm around his boy and he says, look what we did today. Really? Really? See, we know that God is the one who does all the heavy lifting. One more verse in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 16. For when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, since I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. If you are a Christian, you should be able to echo those words. Oh, I don't mean preach as a preacher like I am. but that we are involved in teaching the lost. Which leads us to our last point. The Lord is the ultimate converter. Going back to 1 Corinthians 3, verse 6, we read, God made it grow. The word grow is found 23 times in the New Testament. Three quick usages. Matthew chapter 6. Remember, beginning verse 25, that's where Jesus says, don't worry. Specifically, don't worry about food and clothing. And he talks about the lilies of the field. And he says, God made them grow. In Acts chapter 6, verse 7, the NIV says the number of disciples increased. That's the word grew. 1 Peter 2, verse 2, that you may grow in your salvation. I want you to look at this song. Next slide, please. How many of you know this song, The Lord is in His Holy Temple? Hardly anybody knows this song? Really? Oh, wow. Maybe you have to be old. Well, there are some old people out here. When I was growing up, this was always a song that, if it was sung, it was the first song of the worship service. And we misused it. At least we did in Wichita, where I grew up. The Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before Him. And here's what we were taught. Okay, we're in church. Shh. That's not what that's talking about. If you can read, well, I can't see it from here, but I know it has Habakkuk 2, verse 20. That's where this song comes from. Now, in Hebrew, the word translated silent or silence can mean low volume, no question, but not in that text. It means to bow. It means to revere. It means to obey. 2 verses earlier, Habakkuk will talk about those who make idols. Of course, we see this also we see it in Psalms, we see it in Jeremiah, we see it in Isaiah, how stupid idols are. I make it, and then I bow down to it. What he's saying here is God is on the throne. Pay attention to Him. Listen to Him. Follow Him. You might say, well, Jim, that's interesting. What's that got to do with evangelism? Everything. Because you see, God, and we talked about this at the very beginning of Bible class this morning. God has commissioned us to share the gospel. If you pay attention to the New Testament, you see that you and I today do mission work the opposite of the way it was done in the first century. In Colossians 1, verse 23, Paul will write that every creature's heard the gospel. What was the catalyst of that? Well, you go back to Acts chapter 7. And you recall that Stephen is the first Christian to die because he's a Christian. Chapter 8, verse 1. A great persecution arose against the church. Listen to verse 4. They that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the word. Who were the they? Was it a crack team of evangelists? No. It was members like you and me. And so you and I are to be involved in evangelism. If you don't know this song, it's a very simple one, so sing it with me. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. Keep silent. Keep silent. Keep silent before him. I mentioned that I'm not a farmer. I'm also not a builder. Where I work in Cameroon, many of the houses are made of blocks. And I've watched builders as they build one block at a time. If I have a house of 100 blocks, it doesn't happen like that, does it? It's 1, 1, 1. That's how evangelism works. Next Sunday, you will not, hey, I hope I'm a false prophet, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. You're not going to walk in here and every seat is filled. It doesn't work that way. The way we reach people, the way the church grows, is as each one of us are in the field. Now, I don't know Aaron, but I know this. Aaron cannot grow this church. And that is not a knock on Aaron. The Apostle Paul could not grow. Jesus Christ could not grow this church. One person cannot do it. Think of the people, the reach that all of us have collectively. The people you know in your sphere, friends, relatives, co-workers. Can you imagine what would happen if all of us were reaching out? That's how the church grows. We're going to sing a song of invitation. This is a tradition. It's a good tradition, I believe. I don't know how old the tradition is. It's older than me. I know that. This is a time where if you're not a Christian, I don't know you. There may be someone in this room who's never given their life to Christ. And you're ready to sacrifice your life. That's right, sacrifice, surrender. Give your life to Jesus. If you're ready for that, if you believe in Jesus, if you're ready to repent and confess, we're more than happy to baptize you. But I know most of you are Christians. Let me ask you a question. Are you playing church? I hope you're not. If you are, that's really dumb. Because that's a game you can't win. For those of us who are adults, I'm going to ask a question. I already know the answer. You know the answer. When you were a kid, did you ever disobey mom and dad? Sure you did. And sometimes you got away with it. When I was about 12, my dad was the treasurer for the West Douglas Church of Christ for 42 years. Our building was kind of like this, two sets of, there were pews, but kind of set up like this. But right here was the preacher's office, okay? And Sunday morning after worship was over, Daddy would take the contribution, go in there and count it. And I rarely went in there. Why would I? I'm hanging out with my friends. But this one Sunday, I go in there, and my dad is complaining. Now, you need to understand, my dad had a PhD in gripe, okay? And he said, all these kids putting pennies in the plate. I did. I told all my friends, next week bring pennies. And we did. Okay, I made it a point to go in that Sunday. Mad? Oh, my dad was so angry. And He never found out who the culprit was because I'm alive today. Okay? Now, that's a Mickey Mouse illustration. It's a true story. But here's the point I want to make. I've heard this quote attributed to both Abraham Lincoln and Will Rogers. Obviously, if Lincoln said it first and Will Rogers stole it, that's fine. Who cares? The quote is, you can fool some of the people all the time, and all the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. I would add, you can't fool God none of the time. That's lousy grammar, but it's great theology. So as we get ready to sing, I have one question for you, and for me. Are we living in submission to God? If you need to respond for any reason, we invite you to come now as we stand and sing.